Hi, everyone. Today, let's talk economic data, and then we have some charts to go over, and then we'll take a look at my results for today. If you like trading stocks and options and making money, definitely like and subscribe. I make videos like this every single day, so make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Welcome to the Portfolio Bulletin. Let's get started. Today, we had initial jobless claims, slightly lower than expectations. Ongoing jobless claims also slightly lower than expectations. And then index of leading economic factors down 1%. So the economy is slowing, which is good, but jobs are staying pretty strong overall. The big one to highlight here was gross domestic product revision. I didn't realize this had such an impact, but it continues to go up. So it was revised from 2.6% to 2.9% last time. And then it was revised from 2.9% to 3.2%, meaning that the economy grew pretty fast last quarter. And that really disrupts the argument that the Fed is going to have to start slowing rate increases and potentially cutting to help stimulate the economy if the economy is still growing at 3.2% for last quarter. Tomorrow we have PCE price index, core PCE, PCE price index year over year, and core PCE year over year. So all of these are going to be some pretty decent indicators on what inflation is going to be doing for the next month or two. So we have a little bit of a forecast there. But like I said, the big one here, GDP going up once again over the last two revisions, saying that the economy is strong. And of course, good economic data is bad for the stock market, at least in the short term. Moving over to the charts, starting off with the S&P 500. On the hourly chart, you can see sold off really strongly throughout the day, gap down, sold off all the way to 375.50. Did get down to 375 on the wick, but did hold at 375.50 at the close on the hourly. And then we rallied about 1%, almost 1.5%. So from the gap, we went down 2 3/4 and went up about 1.5%, so down about 1% on the day. If you started at close of day to close of day today, about 1.5%. And this is a little bit tough to trade here. So we had pretty big movement here into the close. Momentum on the hourly is moving higher slightly. We did get pretty close to that 50. You have to expect that this is going to fail, but it certainly could go either way. Momentum is still to the upside. We had that big down move on momentum, bottomed out, slight move higher here. Moving to the 4-hour, though, you can see momentum is fading to the downside. And I would expect this to come in and test the 9 and 21 EMAs just slightly higher than we are now, 382, 382.50. Before we get the continuation down, we do have some decent support, which is held a few times now, but I do expect this to fail going into tomorrow. Moving over to the NASDAQ on the 5-minute chart, you can see what that looked like. Basically held below the 9 EMA on the 5-minute chart throughout the day until we broke it here on the 1240 candle, and then moved back up to that resistance point, the one we had talked about. So we broke the lows here, much lower than the S&Ps, tested that resistance, and then broke right through it, back up, retested it. Then we failed at that point, and I would expect this to hold tomorrow. So I'd expect the sell-off to start a little bit sooner on the NASDAQ versus the S&Ps. Overall on the day, it was down about 2.25%. If you include the after hours, about 2.5%. Pretty rough day on the NASDAQ. At one point, it was down about 4%. So pretty rough trading the NASDAQ here today. Moving over here to the Dow. Similar price action, we did move down, but we did hold that previous low here from Monday. Then we bounced from there. So this still looks like a range. It is a downtrend. We're still below the 144 EMA, but we are chopping around on these EMAs. We could certainly get a potential test of that 144 before we turn down. The Dow is still one of the strongest major indices, and there's potential that this holds. I don't know if I would trade it to the bullish side at this point tomorrow, but it does look a little bit stronger, and it has decent support at 326.50. Moving over to IYT, the transportation ETF. IYT actually closed a little bit higher than it started the day after the gap down, and I would expect this to come up and fill the gap before we get a continuation to the downside. Noting here that all the EMAs are also in order, 921, 55, and 144. So once we come up, fill this gap, I would expect this to move to the downside. But it's worth noting here that IYT was actually a little bit stronger than expected on the day. Momentum to the downside was pretty muted on the hourly chart. So it came down, muted downward movement, and actually turned slightly bullish here at the end of the day. And momentum on the 4-hour chart continues to tick to the downside and might actually turn slightly bullish here tomorrow, at least for a moment. I still expect it to move down later in the day, but momentum here in the short term is pretty bullish. Moving over to XLP, consumer staples continue to be very strong. I thought we would come down into this 72 range, but so far we've held this 74 level. We came down and retested that once again. And then also, like transportation, did finish slightly above the open of the day after the gap down. And I would expect this to fill the gap tomorrow. before we get the resistance at the 21, currently sitting at 75.26. So maybe it comes up to 75 just for a moment on the 4-hour, and then we get that sell off. But compared to the other major indices, consumer staples continues to be pretty strong. Moving over to XOP. After the sell-off today, you have to assume that we're not going to take out this previous high. So we now have a high and a lower high here. And you can call this a lower low from this lower low. And it's slightly below this bottom as well. So we have a new low and a lower high here. And you have to expect that this is going to continue down. Momentum is slightly to the upside here on the hourly chart. But I would assume that that's going to fail pretty quickly tomorrow. Moving over to the 4-hour chart, you can see momentum is still ticking to the downside. Seems like we just found a little bit of buyers, took out the stops here that first time. Might get a slight retrace and then a continuation through that level. Once that level breaks, I think it's going to move pretty quickly to the downside. Moving over to top gainers for today. Yes, there was a stock that did make a little bit of money compared to its close yesterday. And here we have Yum Brands. So Yum had a pretty bad close yesterday. Did gap down slightly, but it rallied throughout the last 2 hours and finished just slightly higher than that previous close here at 128.82. However, it's worth noting here that this channel is starting to move to the downside here. Yum Brands has been very strong. Food and services have been very strong, similar to consumer staples here. I want to note here that this is the August high, so we did make a higher high here on Yum Brands. But here recently, you can see this trend is starting to move to the downside, and we're starting to get below almost all of the EMAs on the hourly chart. Just a couple more days here, and it looks like the 144 will be on top, and this will be a true downtrend. You have a solid top in here at 131.50. And it's worth noting that even these strongest stocks at this point are starting to roll over. And that's something that we've seen on the stocks below the 50-day moving average. You can see they're really starting to pile up, and even the strongest ones are starting to roll over, which means this downward correction, in my opinion, is starting to gain steam. Moving over to the dollar on DXY, you can see here we did rally throughout the session, moved down slightly after hours here, retested that bottom, and then found a solid base at 103.88, then moved all the way up to 104.60. Could certainly call this a test of the 104.50 level, and this would be a fail here. And momentum is definitely moving to the downside, which is a little bit bullish for stocks. However, this is almost a full uptrend. You can see the 9 getting above all the EMAs here. The 21 and the 55 starting to move to the upside. If they get above this 144 here, then you would assume that the dollar is starting to move back into bullish momentum. And you start to see that here on the MACD on the daily chart. Momentum is bullish here. You got the cross a couple of days ago, and this looks like we're about to pick up and at least get a move back up to this 144, somewhere around that 107.85 zone. And if we do get a big move up in the dollar, that's going to be very bearish for stocks, which goes along with the rest of the thesis. It looks like we're turning back to the bearish side, which is a little bit sooner than I expected. Moving over to J&K, not a lot to say here. Gap down, tested that previous low from 2 days ago, and then moved up here slightly. Momentum is still bearish on the 4-hour. We're kind of stuck between the 144 and the 55 here, so we're kind of in a range until this starts to tick down. Once we get below the 144 here, it's going to be another indicator that pretty much everything is going to be moving to the downside here in the short term. Moving over to TLT on the 4-hour, not a lot to say here. You can see momentum is still moving to the upside. Potentially get the cross here tomorrow if we don't get a sell-off. If that does happen, you have to assume that this is going to pick back up to the upside, which would be interesting if we get TLT rallying but stocks and junk bonds selling off, which in my opinion would mean we're getting back to that inverse relationship between stocks and bonds. Previously, we had been moving up together, which was generally a good indicator that people were buying financial assets. But if we see bonds rally here tomorrow and stocks sell off, that'll be an interesting change in what we've seen here recently. Moving over to the VIX on the daily chart, you can see we got one tick of some slightly bullish momentum here. Moving to the hourly to get a better look at that, you can see really strong movement here. But we did sell off pretty strongly into the close. You can see some pretty strong overbought readings here on the VIX as well on that midday candle. But you have to assume that this is bullish at this point and that the stock market will be moving down. Again, I expected a rally today, so I did get caught on that a little bit. But all the indicators now are showing that we are going to be moving down tomorrow. Moving over to my accounts, you can see I was down about 1.2, 1.3% on the day, which is not terrible compared to everything else, but I certainly would like to not lose this much money. I was positioned pretty bullish going into tomorrow. I thought we'd get an up move, Based on the day we had yesterday, pretty strong day, and I thought we'd get at least one more day of continuation before we moved down based on my price targets in yesterday's video. But it did not work out that way. We pushed down very quickly throughout the session. I was able to recoup some of my losses, which is why I was down a little bit less than the major indices. Otherwise, I would have been right on par with the NASDAQ, and I should have been down closer to 2.5%, but I was able to get a little bit of day trading in and recoup some of those losses, which was good. I definitely learned some stuff trading today. Good experience, however, definitely need to be positioned a little bit better going into the day versus how I was today. And as you can see here, I have no positions going into tomorrow just because it does seem a little bit mixed. We have some short-term bullish momentum, but I do expect that to turn bearish. And once I do see that turn fully bearish tomorrow, then I would enter to the short side, depending on what we see on the PCE data tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts on GDP and where you think we're going to be going tomorrow. And definitely like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. Make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.